Hello YouTubers, welcome to DSJC Woodworking. Today we're going to be building a maple box with a nice walnut inlay across the top, as well as some walnut miter splines. I did the splines at an angle just to give it a nice extra little touch. Pretty simple video. If you like what you're watching, please hit that thumbs up. If you already haven't, please hit that subscribe button. We're going to be putting out plenty more videos, so let's go ahead and get to building. Alright, starting off here with a piece of regular hard maple. Going to measure this out to about 44 inches. This is just a rough length. My planer gives off a good amount of snipe, so I want to make sure I'm accounting for that so I can take it off later. So again, just starting off about 44 inches. I'll go ahead and use my combination square to strike a clean line. Really no need for it. Again, this is just kind of a rough length. So not too particular, but I'll go ahead and mark it out anyway. Now over to the miter saw, cut the piece down to that 44-inch line that I just scribed, and take it over to my joiner here. Now over at the joiner, I'm going to go ahead and scribble pencil all over the face. This will just make sure that I am getting every piece of the surface I can. So as I remove those pencil lines, once they're all gone, I know that I've touched every surface and I have a perfectly flat face. So just marking all over the board. Try to show you here, but failed because of lighting. Go ahead and pass it through. I think it took only about 2 passes to get all that pencil. This was S2S, but there was a little twist in it, so I wanted to make sure it's flat. Now that I have that flat face, I can go ahead and send it through my planer, using that flat face bottom to make sure I'm squaring up the top side. And I'm going to go ahead and mill it down to a 1/2 inch thick. It was about 1 inch thick when I got this board, so I wanted to take it down to about 1/2 inches. It is a box. Inch thick walls is a little obnoxious. So now that's all done, I'm going to go ahead and take it back over to my miter saw and cut off that snipe that I talked about. So I was going for 40 inches of desired length. I cut it to 44 and it worked out perfectly. I had exactly 40 inches after I removed the snipe. And so now over to my table saw, I'm going to go ahead and cut this down to the desired height of my box walls. I went 4 inches here. No real rhyme or reason. I just like a good height on my box. Keeps open to what you can store in it. So I'm going to go ahead and use the gripper to make this cut safely. Great tool. It is a little bit on the expensive side, but it keeps you safe. Now that I have it cut to my desired height, I'm going to go ahead and now cut the walls out. I'm doing this in a sequential order. So I'll start with the front face and mark that out. I'm going 12 inches on the front. And then I'm going to do the right side, the back, and then the left side. So again, 12 inches, take it over to the chop saw and just cut it straight down. Miter saw. Just cut it straight down on that 12. We'll put the 45s here in just a bit. But again, we're doing it in sequential order, and this will make sure that there's continuous grain pattern wrapping all the way around the board. Gives it that nice little extra look. So now that I have the 12 inch, I'm going to cut the right side piece, which is about 8 inches here. I'm putting that on my combination square. I'm going to go ahead and strike a mark for 8 inches. I'm using a 12-inch saw, so I don't really need to strike out the whole thing. I just need to put a mark on there, and I can bring the blade to it since it's a sliding miter saw. So now that I have my 8-inch mark set, I'm going to go ahead and make sure I have it aligned to the blade and cut down to 8 inches. So that'll be the right side of my box, and then I'll go ahead and cut out the back, which is 12 inches, and then the left side, which will be another 8 inches. And now I'm just going to go ahead and mark up the face, making sure I know what goes where. Again, I'm looking for continuous grain pattern, so I want things to be set in a specific order. So I'm putting it back like it was before I cut it, and then I'm marking where each piece is, where the top is, where the bottom is, where the left side is, and where the right side is. It gets a little confusing when you're working on the back and the left side, because the back will actually be facing away from you, so you have to be mindful of what's right is actually left, and what's left will actually be right. It'll make sense when you do it, if you do it this way. Again, just looking for that continuous grain pattern, adding that extra touch. And I do get confused here marking this out, because what was facing towards me will not be. So I had to remember what part is going to be facing towards me. So once I figure it out, I'll make sure it's all nice and squared up and give you guys a look at what I'm talking about. So I'll go ahead and just even them out. This is just for video purposes, and you can barely see it, but there is continuous grain pattern going throughout that board. So it looks like it did before I cut it up. Now I'm going to set my table saw to 45 degrees using the digital angle finder. Great tool. If you don't have one, I highly recommend it. They're a little hard to read. The table saws are, with the markings that they have, so using the angle finders definitely a lot better. I'm going to go ahead and cut my first 45 down here using my fence and a miter gauge. I'm going to go ahead and make that first cut at 45, making sure I'm safe, and then I'll go ahead and cut all the rest down. Making sure everything is cut to 45 degrees on both the faces, the back face, the front face, and the two side walls. Using a stop block here, just to make sure I have repeatability, and good to go. Now that I have that, I'm going to cut a rabbet in the bottom for the box, and this is why I labeled the pieces when I was doing that before, just make sure I keep track of what's on the bottom and what's on the top, so that way I can keep that continuous grain pattern. The good thing about miters, you can do the rabbet all the way through, and those the rabbets will be hidden because of those miter joints, so it'll be nice. I do have a dado stack, but I was lazy and decided I didn't want to use it, so I just used my 8-inch kerf and cut it twice for a 1/4-inch piece of ply. Just taking quick measurements here to see what my box is going to measure out at. You do have to factor in those rabbet cuts, so adding a 1/4-inch depth onto all four measurements will give me a 12.5 by 8.5 inch panel. So using walnut ply is just absolutely beautiful. I'm first cutting it down to my 12.5 inches. I felt comfortable doing a cross cut on this, so I went ahead and did it. And now that I have the 12.5, I'm going to go ahead and cut that 8.5. Again, doing the cross cut. I have good control over this wood, so no need for a cross cut sled on this. And now for a great trick, if you've never done it before, using a couple pieces of blue painter's tape, laying it out where the sticky side's facing up, I can go ahead and put all of my pieces, making sure that those points of those miter cuts are butting up nicely against each other, laying them out in the order that they need to go in. I can use the tape to help with the putting together of the box. They act like clamps, or those band clamps. I'm not sure what they're called, but the 4 corner things. I just like this much better. It makes for a smooth piecing together, so you'll see it here. Just get 3 walls up, and it's holding nicely, and now I can slide in my bottom through those rabbet grooves. Once I find the hole, making sure everything's nice and in place, I can pull that that back piece up and send the tape home, making sure I have good strength. This is just a dry fit. I wanted to make sure that everything was going together nicely before I put glue. Had I put glue and something was wrong, I would have to basically start all over or scurry to clean up all that glue that I just put on there. So now that, now that doing the dry fit, I can make sure that everything is in proper order. And there you have it. There's your box. And thanks for watching. I'm just kidding. We're going to go ahead and make sure that, again, everything is nice. Make sure the bottom's in there nice and snug. It does float around a little bit. I'm not going to glue the bottom in just because of the expansion and contraction of the wood. I don't want anything to snap. Before I do the glue up, I am going to pre-sand this to the final grit just on the inside, because once you have it together, it's going to be really difficult to sand the inside. So I went ahead and did it, raising the grain. I went from 80 grit all the way up to 220 for the inside of the box. I won't sand the bottom. It's a nice finish on that, so I'm not too concerned about it. But here I'm just putting a piece of tape on the inside of each corner of the box. This will help with glue squeeze out. Again, last thing you want is glue squeeze out all over your wood as you're doing the glue up, because it's going to be hard to get to once the box is configured. So I'm putting some tape there. I'm clearing the tape out of the rabbet joints there just to make sure that I can get the bottom in the box. So using my marking knife, I cleared out the extra little bit of tape. And now I'm going to go ahead and start the glue up. Just using Titebond 2 here. I'm running low. I do have some Titebond 3 I want to get in there, but I got to use up all this Titebond 2 before I do that. So putting a nice bead of glue. Again, you know, I have protection against squeeze out, so I want to be pretty liberal. The joints aren't the strongest as they sit now, so you know, you want to use a good amount of glue and get in every nook and cranny. And we'll secure the joints up with some splines later on in this video. But I'll go ahead and spread that glue around now using just a little brush, making sure I get in every little crevice. And now I can go ahead and do like I did on my dry fit and get all the tape, and the tape will act as clamps as I pull it pretty taut. It should be pretty stable. And while that's drying up, I'm going to go ahead and cut my lid using the same piece of regular hardwood maple. I'm going to cut it down to rough length. Just overshot the size of my box. I do want a little overhang, so I wanted to make sure that I had enough. And then I'll go ahead and send it to my joiner. Make sure that the edges are square. Very important in this, as I'm going to laminate some walnut in there. I want to make sure everything is nice and square. And once I have one side square, I can cut it down to the final width. I did about 4.5 inches, I think, on this. It all really depends on how big your boxes end up being, and just make sure you overcut. You can always clean it up later. But this is just rough for the glue up, so I'm just going to go ahead and put some glue. You see that piece of wall? I just had it laying around. I did plane it down real quick off camera, but I made sure it was nice and square. Go ahead and tighten those up on the bottom. Don't really care too much about sliding left and right. Honestly, I well overbuilt it, so I'm going to cut down quite a bit. And now that my box is all out of glue, I'm going to go ahead and start my miter splines. I just kind of gave the wheel a couple turns to put an angle on these splines. But the one thing you want to make sure is your blade height doesn't cut all the way through the box. So just pay attention to where your blade is, and you should be good. And I do have a video on building that miter spline jig, so check that out, and it'll save you a bunch of time. And then I set my fence to 2.5, 3.5, and 4.5 inches, and just cut all 4 sides at each measurement, and it worked out. Gave me a perfect spacing. Again, depending upon how tall your box is, just make sure you even it out. I don't think there's really any rules to what size or how many versus how much spacing, but just give yourself a good amount. And then over here, I'm going to take a piece of walnut I had laying around, and I'm going to cut some material for my splines. This walnut, I set my fence to 1/8 inch, as that's the thickness of my kerf of my blade. So I know it's going to be 1/8 inch keys. You want to go slightly under it. You don't want a super snug fit, because once you get glue on there, it's going to be really hard to get it home. And you do not want to hit them with any sort of mallet or hammer to get them snug. You will break them. So just doing a dry fit. All right, everything looks good. Went in there nice and smoothly. I'm going to go ahead and mark it out. This will just give me a nice cut line to reference to. And while I'm doing this, I'm also going to mark out which one it goes to. So I'm just numbering them 1 through 12 and making sure that every piece correlates with its home. Then back over to the bandsaw, I'm going to go ahead and cut out these keys. I'm not going to cut to my marking line. I'm going to cut well over it. I don't want to undercut it and have to sand the box to the keys. It would be much easier to sand these keys down to the box. So I'm going to go ahead and overcut it by probably about 1/4 inch on some of these. Honestly, I wouldn't recommend going that far, but I just like to be safe. So you'll cut out a bunch of little triangles, 12 to be exact, as I did 3 splines on all 4 corners. And now that I have all my keys and I put them back in their homes, I'm going to go ahead and apply some glue on both sides. Make sure you spread it around real nice. Get glue all over your hands. This is messy. If you want to wear gloves, I'm not going to be mad at you. I have them. I never wear them. Only when I apply finishes, I'll put the gloves on. But here, I'm just doing this unprotected. So go ahead and make sure everything fits in there nicely. Make sure it's all snug as a bug in a rug. And we're good. Just go ahead and repeat the steps for all 12 of your splines and let them dry. As you can see, I did leave a lot of material left. I did this with a Japanese pole saw, and you can honestly just sand them down. Once I had them rough cut on that, I went ahead and made sure everything was nice and flush with the sander here, just using 80 grit, making sure everything's nice. I did scar it a little bit with the pole saw, so I wanted to make sure I took care of that. But making sure everything, all the glue is gone. Just really doing a clean job. This is not my final sanding. This is just to make sure everything looks good. Because now I want to make sure that there's any gaps. I'm not using a flat bottom grind blade, so there's like this chevron pattern that gets left over. But if you mix the same species of sawdust with some glue, you can really patch over those holes and make it look seamless. So that's all I'm doing here, is just filling in any cracks, voids, making sure that everything is flush and looks pretty. And you'll see it at the end. But well, as that's drying, it doesn't really take long. It's dried at this point. I'm going to go ahead and hog out some mortises for my hinges there. Just clearing some space for my hinges to lay flat, so the lid lays flat on the back of the piece. You don't want a lid that's kind of at a funny angle, so I'm just clearing out a little bit of space. It's like less than 1/8 of an inch, so just be safe, go slow. You don't want to blow it out. And now that my lid is all dry, I'm going to go ahead and cut it down to the final length. I could have done this on the table saw with my crosscut sled, but it was, I wanted a little bit of overhang, so I didn't have to be super precise. I'm going to end up with an 1/8 inch overhang on each side, with about a 1/2 inch overhang on the front. Instead of using hardware to have the lid pull on, I'm just going to leave that 1/2 inch overhang so you can lift up on the lid at any point on that lid. So just making sure everything's kind of lined up. I'll go ahead and send my screws home using paste wax and not using a driver. These screws are pretty small and you'll most likely snap them. So just use a handheld screwdriver, some paste wax. Make sure you're using a good drill bit to pre-drill the pilot holes, and you'll be good to go. And now that the back hinges are on, I'm going to go ahead and cut a chamfer on my lid just to give it a nice little extra look. I decided this at the last second. So I wanted to go ahead and do this. I did it on all four sides. You only see one cut here, but all four sides have a 45-degree chamfer. I did put the lid on the top hinges, but apparently I didn't press record. But I also sanded the entire box, again, going from 180 to 120 to 180 to 220. I popped the grain between each sand to make sure that everything is smooth as can be when it's all said and done. And then I'm just applying some tung oil here. Tung oil has good protection. A box like this shouldn't get too much use and abuse, so no need for going crazy on a finish here. This is just to make it look real nice and gives it a nice little sheen also at the end. But yeah, this is the build. You know, overall probably took me about 3 hours to build this, but I had to do it over the course of a couple days, just because I work full time and have a family. So I just kind of do this in my spare time. Not, you know, a pro by any means. I'm still getting my feet wet at this, but it's fun, and I feel like I have enough knowledge to start, you know, kind of sharing some of my experiences with you guys and how I do things. So appreciate, you know, anybody's watching. I'm just sitting here finishing up this box, applying that last little bit of tung oil, making sure I get it around everywhere nice and even. I'll switch to a buffer pad here in a second. Just make sure that everything is nice and coated, and then I'll apply some more. It's a little off camera there. Got a little carried away with that one. Brush that one on, and then get that bottom of the box. Man, that walnut is beautiful. Using the brush to make sure I get in every corner, and I'll hit it again here in a second. I'll get the inside of the box. Walnut and maple just, it goes so nice together. And using the brush to hit every nook and cranny, making sure I have an even finish across the entire box. And here's the final product. All right, everybody, that concludes this build. Thanks for watching. Hit that thumbs up, hit that subscribe button if you already haven't. Stay tuned for more builds. We're going to go ahead and have Peyton send us away with a joke.
What'd the ocean say to the beach?
What?